Hello and welcome back to the Diaries of Space Explorers, the podcast where we chat with explorers in the space industry about what it is that brought them to the field of space and why space exploration is actually quite vital and important for everyone back on Earth. I am your host, Gavin Tolometti, and we're going to be taking another non-science and engineering journey to space today. We're going to be speaking with Kate Howells, who is a communication strategist for the Planetary Society. She has spent her years working to engage with the public to talk about space exploration and how advancing technologies in this sector have, one, benefited everyone on Earth, two, been able to provide new insights about our universe and the solar system that we inhabit, and three, just get to talk about how cool space really is. And speaking of how cool space really is, she is also the author of a book called Space is Cool As. Now, I was really excited about this episode, and we really got to chatting about how space exploration has really developed over the years, how we both managed to find our way to space, and I got to learn more about how you can get into the space industry without a science and engineering background. So without further ado, let's get right into the episode. I noticed that the telescope in your background. Have you been able to get any good
No.
astronomy was observing lately?
No, I got that for Christmas from my family, and it's been so overcast since then. And also, I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to the cold, so I haven't been taking it out very much. But I'm hoping that this summer I'll get some good opportunities to take a look. So I've worked in the space industry for a long time, but I've never had my own telescope. So this is a new hobby for me.
But being in Canada, you would think getting used to the cold must be like something everyone would be adapting to by now.
No, you'd think so, but no, I still don't like it.
That's fair. I mean, so there's no way you can get a good view from your window, or it
I
depends on.
I can get a good view of the moon, which is something that I do like to observe. So, and I've done that a couple times since getting the telescope. But I'm really keen to try to take a look at like Jupiter and Saturn. And unfortunately, I really missed my opportunity when they were out for so long, and the conjunction and everything. But I know they'll come back around.
Oh, I was so upset with the conjunction because it was overcast for that entire week.
Yeah,
So there was no way for me to see it. So the best I could do was go online and look at live videos of people
yeah.
observing it. It wasn't the
Yeah, same
same though.
here. I know I would have loved to have been able to see that through a really powerful telescope and see, the bands on Jupiter and the rings on Saturn and the moons. Like that would have been seeing all of that all in one view would have been really, really cool. And I'm disappointed that I couldn't. But at the end of the day, even just seeing photos of other people's views through their telescopes, like it still hit home for me. So I still appreciated the conjunction, even though I couldn't really see it for myself.
No, I remember the first time I saw Saturn's rings through a telescope, and that blew my mind about how
Yeah.
clear you could see them as well. And
Yeah.
then with Jupiter, when you get to see some of the Galilean moons with
Yeah.
they're bright enough.
Yeah. It's really, really very impressive. And yeah, that's one of my favorite sort of space experiences is like seeing something for yourself that you've seen so many images of or learned so much about, but then actually seeing it and knowing like it's right there. That's really cool. I love that.
I know. It makes me wish that I had my own telescope. It's on my bucket list of things to get, but
Hmm.
I need to also get a vehicle so I could drive maybe further north away from the lights, and
Yeah.
in case it's kind of cloudy, but I can maybe get away from the clouds.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I'm hoping to take this. I mean, it's not a very big telescope, but I'm hoping to take it out of the city in the summer, especially.
Yeah, I hope in the summer we get some better weather to do some more astronomy observing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will.
So fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
So Kate, do you want to quickly say what is it that brought you into the field of space?
Yeah, so I didn't really get hooked on space until I was midway through my undergrad. I was studying psychology at McGill, and I started to take some elective courses in Earth and Planetary Sciences because McGill has really great science for non-science student courses. And so I started to kind of get a little bit interested through just elective courses. And then I started reading Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and that really was what changed everything for me, where I really started to appreciate the sort of beauty and majesty of the universe, and started to think about sort of my own place in all of that. And it was sort of these sort of big ideas, and also learning about um, missions like Voyager that did this incredible exploration and had these you know epic trajectories that had been mapped out before computer technology was even around to assist. Like the sort of impressiveness of these feats of exploration really struck me too. So I started to get really interested, and I was already, I was halfway through a BA, so I kind of figured it was unlikely that I was going to be able to go into any kind of space career without going back and starting over as a science student. But um, I wound up finding a master's program in the States in space policy, and just found that was like one opportunity that I could take to apply my sort of more art centric education to a space to my space interest. And so that wound up being the path I took. But honestly, I credit all of this to Carl Sagan's work. Like he really was the one who sparked my imagination and my curiosity, and it's kind of just been the history from there.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of the videos of when he used to give seminars just trying to explain how vast, large, complicated, and fascinating space really is, from something as big as a supernova all the way down to the atoms that build everything that we see. So I
Mhm.
want to quickly ask you, was there a particular talk that's very memorable from you that Carl Sagan gave?
I haven't watched his lectures as much, but I've seen his like the Cosmos TV series as well. Like I read the book first and then watched the series later, and so that's more what I'm familiar with from him. And I mean, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's beautifully dated in that it's like very sort of, I guess it was made in the early 80s, I would say. So it's got that aesthetic to it, which I love. I'm like a big fan of vintagey stuff and whatever. um but it's just that the poetic way that he speaks and presents information throughout that series is so good. And I know that he brings that kind of perspective and that way of presenting information to a lot of his other work, like a lot of his talks and stuff. But yeah, Cosmos is definitely the where I'm most familiar with his work in terms of his, speaking and presenting.
Yeah, I have to embarrassingly admit I've not read his Cosmos book, and I feel like it's something that I need to read if I'm going to be staying in the field of space. It's just one of those things that you need to do, I feel.
I mean, I would say there's no should, there's no must, but you probably would enjoy it. It's yeah, it's it's a great book in terms of like the content itself, but I also find it very inspiring. And I suppose with this podcast, you're interested in presenting or like talking about space and science, like that kind of public engagement. I personally, I've learned a lot from Carl Sagan's work in terms of how I approach that kind of work. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. But I feel the same way. I'm not very familiar with the Star Trek world, and I feel like as a space person, I should watch Star Trek so that I can participate in conversations about it, because everybody in this business is a Trekkie, like most people, anyways. So I have that same sort of like guilty feeling that you have with Cosmos, but about the entire Star Trek franchise.
I mean, if I want to build on my guilt, I grew up with Star Wars. It wasn't Star
Mm,
Trek for me. It was
mhm.
my dad grew up on old like Star Trek from the original Next Generation, and I've been meaning now that they're all on Netflix to watch them. But
Mm.
again, it's something I keep putting off, which I really
Yeah.
feel like I should at least
Oh, I'm the same
watch.
way. There's a lot of it too, and I've been thinking like maybe now during lockdown, now's the best time to dive into that because I've got so much time on my hands, but I still haven't done it. But
Yeah, I
someday.
feel yeah, I feel as you said, we'd be able to join so many more conversations that people have when it comes to just directly to ask talking about Star Trek, or when they make Star Trek references that just go
Yeah,
way over our heads.
yeah, totally.
So, so when you after you did your bachelor's and your right masters, when you realized that space was something I really wanted to get into, and with listening to Carl Sagan and reading his book that really got you inspired, what type of field that really caught your eye at that point?
Like within space science or within space in general.
So with
Definitely.
space in general, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm definitely more interested in the science side of things. Like I'm not a big like human exploration fan. I don't really get that excited about like commercial space flight or the industry or the sort of nationalism that about like a lot of people want to talk about Canada and space and Canada, you know, doing great things, and the US, they're especially interested in like American leadership in space, and like that kind of stuff is less interesting to me. I'm much more interested in the science side of things, and I wound up kind of diving more into planetary science because I think partly because I find like planetary bodies very interesting. But I think also at this point, because I've been working in a planetary science related job for many years now, I'm much more familiar with that particular field. So like cosmology and that kind of thing, I find very interesting, but I'm less well versed in it. Um, but yeah, in general, yeah, talk to me about like the stuff that's out there, like the planets, the moons, the galaxies, and I love learning about space exploration, like engineering and like orbital mechanics and kind of all the um, sort of technology and engineering that goes into studying things in space, whether it's telescopes on Earth or in space or spacecraft going out or whatever, radio astronomy, all that stuff. I find that really interesting.
So I guess then, since if you're not the biggest fan of commercial flights, but you love all the spacecraft that get to observe the universe and other worlds, and you just mentioned radio astronomy, I'm guessing maybe you've been following the James Webb telescope mission. That's trying to remember when it was planned for
Oh,
launch.
so long. It's been delayed
Yeah,
and delayed and delayed.
yeah.
It's
It's I
yeah.
keep losing track now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that very much because I know it's a different mission, but the other space telescopes that have already delivered science and particularly images, I've just found, like Hubble in particular, I've just found to be such a phenomenal tool, not only in the science it's accomplished, but um, in the way that it's brought space down to earth for people. I'm a big fan of space imagery because that's something that's very immediately accessible to the public, and obviously I'm very keen on engaging the public in space and getting people excited about what's out there. And I think it's a lot easier for people to get excited or understand what's happening in space when they can see an image. So I know that James Webb is going to be a really great tool, not only for science, but also for that kind of public engagement piece. Because I personally just can't wait to see what it's going to show us.
Yeah, I think with public engagement, especially when it comes to radio astronomy or a lot of astro physics and astronomy missions, it's that the public love just like how cool all these images are that they observe. But I wonder like how often the questions come up saying like, okay, we're looking at a nebula or a black hole from a distance, but is this really that important to
Hmm.
me? And I feel like it's a question that's a valid question, but at the same time, I think just saying that it's not important at all isn't exactly true, because there's a lot we can actually one learn from observing these different structures in the universe, but at the same time the technology we're developing for it can
Yeah.
actually come back down and help us, but a lot of people I think just don't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like if someone says like, "Oh, well, poetry's great and all, but why is poetry important to me?" It's like this poetry or beautiful images of galaxies, like both of those I think are things that people can use to better understand their own lived experience and to reflect on what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. And there's this sort of spiritual depth that I really appreciate in looking out beyond Earth and understanding the cosmos that we live in. And I think, yeah, it's hard to put like a dollar value on the return on investment that people get for their tax money that's spent on these missions. But I really think that not only are we learning things that could affect us in the future, like say we discover life on another world, or say we discover intelligent alien life, or say we discover that there's an asteroid that's going to hit Earth in 20 years. Like there are a lot of different ways that this could be directly relevant to us. But I also think there's just, with a lot of science and a lot of art as well, a big part of why we do it is just because we want to better understand ourselves and our lived experience. So I think that that's for me, and maybe I'm a bit of a romantic with this, but like I think that that's one of the big reasons why it is important to do this kind of science. And then yeah, of course there are technological spin-offs. There's the fact that the people that these tax dollars are funding, like the scientists and engineers and others who are involved in these kinds of missions. I mean, those are highly skilled, highly intelligent people who are, here on Earth working these jobs and, paying taxes and everything, and contributing to society in other ways. And so the investment that we put on these missions, like it's being spent here on Earth to support highly skilled people. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that I could argue why it's important for us to go look at a nebula.
No, I think that's a really good argument. It does help support all of the incredible and clever scientists and engineers that we have working on these missions. They're pushing the initiative and creativity of humanity just to show if we can do this, imagine what we could do in the future.
Mhm.
And I completely agree. I think your arguments are very valid for that point. And I think another one that, at least personally for me, it gives you just that little bit of excitement to make you happy to sometimes get up and
Mhm.
go to work and do all of this and get to learn about all these new things. It just gives you that extra push to think, you know what, I'm going to get up and learn about this mission that just launched yesterday. Let's find out what it is they're going to do. It's just that
Mhm.
extra excitement. It's like when someone's, I think, guess the morning of the Super Bowl, if someone who's into football, they're going to be excited to get up just to watch it. But does that really benefit people that are not into Super Bowl? Not really. But you get
Mhm.
that. But either way, you get that excitement to wake up to go see it, even though the value returned back may not be as big as what's going into it.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, and I think there's also a lot to be said for, space, like, as a field that is sort of it's interesting and it's appealing on a surface level and deeper, but it's like accessible on a surface level through, you know, beautiful images and through the sort of astonishing and amazing things that we know about the universe. Like, you learn about black holes and supernova and stuff like that. That's people can see that that's cool. And I think that that is a really great way to get people interested in science in general and get people to be a little bit more curious about the world that they live in. And I think, especially for young people, kids and students, I think space can be a good hook that gets you really interested in science or engineering or whatever it is. And then maybe you wind up going into a different field of science, but I think it's a great sort of introduction to get people interested in, yeah, science or engineering or these other fields that, are valuable to society and can be really enriching for a person's life.
No, I agree. I think with space, when you're introduced it so young, it's so appealing that you just get hooked into it. And then, as you said, even if you don't stick with space, you've just been introduced to the STEM field.
Hmm.
So then you could divert to any other, like, say, physics, chemistry, mathematics,
Hmm.
any type of engineering, even medicine,
Hmm.
because you just been introduced to all these different types of sciences because planetary science is so interdisciplinary that
Hmm.
everyone's just getting put together and are working together to solve similar world problems and problems for space exploration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since you did mention the term earlier, spin-off technology, and this is one thing that I like this podcast to build on a lot, and we've been talking about images, and I'm just trying to get what came to my mind was that I'd learned that the small little camera in everyone's iPhone that people use to take photos and term selfies actually came from space itself, and it took me a while
Oh.
to realize that. And I think the more I think about it, the more it just blows my mind that that trend that started, I think, about just under a decade ago, is only happened because a satellite was sent into space and they miniaturized the camera, which I thought was actually
Hmm.
really cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that, or if I did, it sounds like something I may have learned and forgotten. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, there's the it's so challenging to do stuff in space that it definitely does drive technology development in a really unique way where you're not motivated or required to innovate in the same way when you're just operating on Earth. So yeah, I'm not like a huge knowledge. I don't have a huge knowledge base of spin-off technologies. Like obviously I didn't know about the phone one, but I'm very aware that that's one of the real tangible benefits of space exploration. But this actually reminds me in terms of talking about like why do space exploration. Um, there's this great speech by a former head of NASA whose name eludes me now, but he talked about the real reasons for exploring space versus the acceptable reasons for exploring space. And he talks about, the real reasons are things like um, just like the drive to know and understand, the sort of beauty and poetry of it, the just like yeah, that basic human curiosity, the desire to kind of push the boundaries and expand frontiers, like those kind of more deep, like almost philosophical motivations for exploring space. And then there are the acceptable reasons, which are the ones that you sort of pitch when you're talking to government officials about about setting budgets, or you're talking to concerned citizens about maintaining budgets, when some mission is going over and whatever. And those are things like the economic benefits to the country, the spin-off technologies, the high level, like highly skilled workforce investments, that kind of thing. And I think that that's something that's always resonated with me, is that, like there are sort of both of these types of reasons to explore space, the like really deep poetic ones, but you can't put a dollar value on, and the ones that are maybe less, they're not driving it as much. Like we don't explore space for the spin-off technologies, but those are one of the things that you can actually really directly point to and say, this is one of the clear benefits of doing this. And I think that it's important to kind of think about both of those reasons for why we do this.
No, actually, I did not know about this speech. So actually, I think I'm gonna have to look into this afterwards to hear it
Yeah.
firsthand. But it
if if you give me a second, I'm going to look it up. I know you don't want to hear me typing in this, but Mike Griffin.
Mike Griffin. Okay.
Mike Griffin was the administrator of NASA, um, from 2005 to 2009, and he was the one who gave this speech of the real versus the acceptable reasons for exploring
Hmm.
space.
I have a feeling that speech needs to be rebroadcast
Hmm.
today because I think a lot of people who are not into space and probably some in space need to probably just get refreshed, especially people who are new to the
Hmm.
field. So they probably have never even heard of the acceptable and the actual reasons for why we
Hmm.
are conducting space exploration. But I do
Hmm.
feel like with the economy side, I know nowadays they're really trying to build. I know it's still in the very early stages, and we have no idea when it would actually become its own economy. That space economy, it's been trying to establish
Hmm.
itself, especially with new technology that's being developed, new missions that are heading to the moon for extracting resources. space being somewhat privatized and commercial companies being involved. I
Mhm.
think now that might be a bit bigger than what it was over 15 years ago when it was solely science and engineering driven.
Mhm. Well, there's always been like the big companies that do space technology have generally also done military technology. So I know about this more in the US context. So companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin that have been, the contractors for most NASA missions, they also build like warfare technologies. So there's the kind of history of the space industry has been problematically tied to the military industrial complex. So this is something that is changing. So like SpaceX um is launching military satellites and that kind of thing, but they're not also building like attack helicopters or whatever. Like I don't know the specific technologies that Boeing makes, but it's that kind of crossover that used to be a lot more dominant in the space industry. So I think it's really good to diversify like which kind of companies are building things like rockets or like the spacecraft themselves um, for many reasons, but largely, I mean, partly because we want to build this space economy, we want to create more jobs, more opportunities, we want to have healthier competition within the industry to drive innovation and that kind of thing. But also, I'm a pacifist. I'd rather we move away from fueling the military industry by giving contracts to those companies.
Yeah, I think trying to make sure we do not militarize space should be a number one concern, because the last thing we do need is to have more conflicts moving into space where it's going to become a lot more complicated. And
Hmm.
I actually just recently taken a space law at Weston, and they did talk a lot about the demilitarization of space and the vague language they use in the Outer Space Treaty. And one of the articles, I'm already blanking which one it was, but it pretty much said that no weapons of mass destruction can be put into space. But that just means you're just stopping them from putting nuclear weapons or giant ballistic missiles in. But there are other ways to put something that could be weaponized into space, but they don't say that you can't do that,
Hmm.
but you shouldn't. So it's very weird. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be talked about more now that America's private companies are getting more involved. China's getting more involved in space exploration now. Europe, India is now becoming a lot more established. So I think it's
Hmm.
definitely, you are right. There's definitely something that needs to be discussed more and thought about a bit more.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding among the public about what the militarization of space really looks like, and things like the United States government establishing the Space Force. Everybody that is kind of outside of the space business that I've talked to about Space Force, they have this understanding that like Trump was creating this so that they could put spacecraft like with guns in orbit or like shooting lasers at earth from orbit. Like this idea of what like weaponizing space looks like is, I think, pretty far from the reality, where we're not going to be like dropping nukes from orbit, but it's more about making sure that the space environment that everybody depends on so much for communications, for GPS, for weather, for let alone like for science and exploration, ensuring that domain is secure and that people aren't able to destroy each other's satellites and that kind of thing. Like it's kind of more nuanced than people understand, but I think that there is a real public uh, like impression that militarization of space is like putting guns in orbit, which is obviously not something we would want to do. And I think that is what these you mentioned, like the outer space treaty talking about not putting weapons of mass destruction in orbit. Like I think that was kind of the initial understanding of what the dangers of militarizing space would be. But I think now the bigger danger is like if some malicious actor destroyed a bunch of another country's satellite communication satellites and created a ton of debris in orbit that would then like take out other satellites. Like that's kind of the more realistic danger. And yeah, this is all outside, a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but again, in terms of like my interest in public understanding and public engagement in space, I think that's one of the areas where the reality is a little bit different from what people understand.
Yeah, I feel like the reality gets lost a little bit when it's presented in the media. I
Hmm.
don't know. I would like to think it's not really intentional. I think it's just usually a miscommunication that something's
Hmm.
either exaggerated, which then gets taken out of context, or something's misunderstood. So then it's presented incorrectly. And then everyone's like trying to pick up the pieces to explain to everyone, like, no, that's not what they meant.
Yeah.
Especially because I know the popularist one is when usually when Martian scientists say they found something that may suggest an environment that could have once in the past harbored life, but then the media goes life found on Mars question mark, and then it's
Yeah.
like that's not what we said at all.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. There's a lot of I mean, because yeah, space science is complicated and nuanced, and that nuance gets lost in translation so easily. But unlike a lot of other scientific fields where the public doesn't really care, and like, newspapers aren't going to report on some advancement in like, the study of mushrooms or something. Like people aren't going to get excited about that. So it doesn't really matter. Like there's not that so much of like a opportunity for that confusion in translation or that sort of dumbing down and oversimplification of advances in that science. But with space, because it's kind of like sexy and exciting as a field, people really do want to read about, the possibility of life on Mars. So there's so much more opportunity for the media to kind of get something wrong and have the public understanding of it shift as well. Yeah.
No, I know, I completely agree. And so with your public engagement like career, you definitely have to have talked to so many people who are interested in space, skeptical about space, or just general interests like how do I get into space exploration, but maybe not from the traditional hardcore science engineering point of view. So I was wondering if
Mhm.
you can touch a little bit about how is you got into public engagement.
Yeah. So I often when people ask me like, how did you get into your job? Because I want to do something similar, I feel like my answer is very unhelpful because I went in a unconventional path, and I also was lucky. I was sort of at the right place at the right time. So my current job is with the Planetary Society, this international nonprofit that advocates for space science and exploration. I had gone to the States for this master's in space policy. And I actually, while I was there, it was a 2-year program. I only did 1 year of it because I realized quite quickly that the policy world, and particularly the American policy world, was not for me. I was really unhappy there. And so I decided that I wanted to sort of change my path. And I knew that what I was most interested in was public education and public engagement, and I had come to that understanding through my work, my research and studies in space policy. Like the part of policy that I got most interested in was the fact that like yeah, for the government to fund space exploration or space science, they need to do so with the support of the people. Like government funds are are only really allocated when the public supports that allocation. And that can be very indirect, but basically it's sort of the more that people are supportive of something, the more money can go to it. It's like politically um, possible to put money behind it. So I got really interested in that sort of that aspect of policy where the public support came in. And I realized that my interest was much more about that actual um, you know raising public awareness and establishing public support than the actual like mechanisms of policy analysis and budget setting and that kind of thing. So all that is to say, I decided to leave this program, and I was going to go into a different master's in science education and public engagement. But while I was in DC, I was working at the Space Policy Institute as assistant to the program director. So this was the program that I was studying, and I was also working as an assistant. And I just got the opportunity to assist with the board, with the meeting of the board of directors of the Planetary Society, because they were affiliated with that program. So I got to chatting with the board, and they happened to be interested in expanding the Planetary Society's work into Canada. And I knew that I wanted to go back to Canada. So I volunteered to help them get a sense of what they could do in Canada. And I wound up establishing a good enough case that they could do some work in Canada, that they hired me to do that work in Canada. So I really am grateful and aware that I lucked out a lot in terms of being able to have that opportunity. And then I've just been with the Planetary Society since then. Like that was in 2013 that I was in DC and talking with them. So it's been a long time now. And yeah, so yeah, it's not like the most helpful example of how to get into a job like that, but since I've been in this position, I've seen a lot of other people who work in the space sector, people who work at the Planetary Society and other organizations. I've seen a lot of people take what I would call a non-traditional path into a space-related job. So the traditional path, of course, is doing science or engineering. That's the most direct route to work on like space missions and that kind of thing. But my colleagues at the Planetary Society, they have backgrounds in marketing, finance, fundraising, management, communications, broadcasting. Like there's all different paths that lead to jobs in public engagement in science. If you want to actually work for NASA or for SpaceX or for the Canadian Space Agency or whatever, there are still a lot of different ways that you can get involved. Like every organization, company, agency, they need designers, they need accountants, they need lawyers, they need writers and editors. I think, in general, I would say to people that if they want to work in the space sector, they should still focus on the type of work that they are passionate about or that they're good at or they're interested in, because you don't have to be a scientist to work in like some kind of job that's related to space science.
No, I completely agree. I think we hear a lot about scientists and engineers who do the hardcore route and then they try to get into science communication, but they don't have that same level of experience trying to communicate or engage with the
Mhm.
public, or even to just other executives who just don't happen to be scientists, and then they struggle to try and communicate. So
Mhm.
I think people who like communicators, as you said, marketers, financiers, fundraisers, they have that experience when it comes
Mhm.
to talking to the public. They know how to get their attention. They know what it is that will have them interested and take away what you tell them, other than
Mhm.
you just throw a lot of jargon at them and then they're going to forget about it in 5 minutes. So I think
Mhm.
both sides help each other immensely.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah.
Like I've encountered a lot of space scientists and engineers who do fascinating work but cannot talk about it in a way that is interesting. Like I've listened to people give talks on topics that are so cool, but the way that they present the information is so boring that it completely misses the point. And so, and it's because you don't need to be a good communicator to be a good scientist or engineer or whatever. Like it's a great skill to have, to be like a good communicator, but it's not fundamental to the role. So it's something that I'm a big fan of programs that train STEM people to do public speaking better, whether it's at scientific conferences or public speaking engagements, like for the general public. I think, and so if you're a skilled communicator, maybe you can wind up being like a consultant that helps scientists learn how to present their information better. I mean, there's a lot of ways that, as you say, these skills sort of support each other, and we do need both types of people. But yeah, it's tricky. It's not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's just it was never really taught much in school or university, especially in the sciences, how to communicate your work.
Hmm.
They mainly focused on how to communicate your work to your own field, which
Yeah,
is probably why they end up being a lot drier and
yeah.
less interesting as they'd like to be, because they don't have to worry about explaining every definition,
Hmm.
pointing out details in a diagram, because everyone should know what that is. But
Hmm.
then I feel like nowadays it's gotten a lot better because a lot more departments and universities have realized, okay, if you struggle to tell me how important your research is to me, who has nothing to do with your field, and I don't understand it, then I can
Hmm.
guarantee you when you try to apply for funding, you're probably not going to get it, because a majority of people that give out funding usually are not scientists. And if
Hmm.
they don't find your work interesting or understand what it is, that to their eyes, it's not worth funding.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Learning to talk the talk of like grant applications, that's a whole other skill set. I mean, there's like talking to your peers in the science community, there's talking to, yeah, granting agencies and government, and then there's talking to the public, and those are three different languages. And mastering three different languages is difficult. So yeah, it's not surprising. But as you say, I think people, I mean, like universities and other kind of programs are starting to put more emphasis on learning those other skills. Like here in Canada, we have the Canadian Satellite Design Challenge, which is this fantastic program that works with university students to like set up, teams that design, CubeSats. I think it's CubeSats. Um, and part of the challenge requirements for each team is to do some kind of public outreach or talk to school children or something like that. So they're required not just to focus on the actual engineering of this satellite, they're also encouraged or required to learn to and get comfortable with talking about their work to people outside of their field. And I think that kind of experience is, it's, I wouldn't say that it's crucial, because you don't need to know how to do that to be a successful engineer or scientist, but it certainly is helpful. And especially given the fact that for most science oriented space programs, they're funded by the government. And if the public doesn't care, the government has no reason to keep that funding going if it's something that could easily be cut. You know, the general public is always going to applaud a smaller budget from the federal government, which means no tax hikes and all that. So it's more politically popular to cut budgets than to increase them. So where they can get away politically with cutting something, they're more likely to do that. Unless it has some huge national security um, importance or something like that. So as members of like the science or the STEM community, the space community, every person working in that field has the incentive to get the public on board with the kind of work they're doing. So yeah, it's important.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I really do hope that universities continue to keep promoting it and making sure students leave with a little bit of that skill set, which could probably
Hmm.
greatly help them in whatever career
Hmm.
they decide to take. Now,
Definitely.
now before we get to the question portion, I just wanted to quickly ask about the book that you wrote.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Am I allowed to say its name on your podcast?
Um, you can say
Do
it for
you,
now. I can censor it
you can
later
bleep
if I
it?
have to. Yeah.
Okay. So my book is called Space is Cool as F-, and it's a very controversial title, but the motivation behind calling it that was to get people's attention and make it clear that this is not like a stuffy textbook. So it's a collaborative effort between me and my publisher and a few guest writers and many artists. And an art director who kind of pulled it all together. And basically, it's a book just talking about the things that I find most fascinating and delightful about space. So, things ranging from, just how magnificent Jupiter is as a planet, ranging all the way to like little tidbits from the history of space science and exploration that I find, funny or interesting. All of it is like a very shallow dive into many, many different topics rather than going deep. And it's geared towards a sort of younger adult public audience. And there's a lot of artwork throughout it. It's like kind of a coffee table style book. And yeah, really just trying to convey how awesome space is and showing that you don't have to be like a science person to appreciate it. So it came out a few years ago, and it's about to be re-released this year it was put out originally by an Australian publishing company called Pantera Press, and it's being re-released in the States by Andrews McNeil. McNeil? Does that sound wrong? Anyways, it's coming out in the States again this year, and yeah, it's a fun book. I encourage anybody who's interested or who has like a 25-year-old son or friend or cousin who doesn't quite get why space is cool, like buy them this book and they'll see.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was a while ago, but when I was in chapters, I looked for it and started going through it. And I mean, I'm already into space and the
Mm-hmm.
moon in general, and I still loved reading it. So if
Good,
anyone
thank
out
you.
there, no problem. I highly recommend anyone who's listening to go find and buy this book and keep an eye out if you're in the States for when it comes out again.
Yes, it'll come out in Canada too. I should have specified. It's an American publishing company, so rather than having it shipped all the way from Australia to bookstores in North America, now it's coming from North America. So it's just less expensive now, which is important to me because the original publishing was this big, beautiful hardcover book, and it's gorgeous, but it was quite expensive. And I really want this to be something that's accessible to people. So it's coming out paperback, much more affordable, and still totally awesome.
Oh, that sounds great. So everyone keep an eye out for when this comes out in Canada and the United States. So
Thank
make
you.
sure you grab your copy.
Thank you.
So, Kay, I want to get into the question portion of the podcast that I ask
Sure.
all the guests.
Yes.
So, I want to go with the first question. If you wanted one mission to go to a celestial body in our solar system, which body would you want it to go to?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question because there are so many worlds that I find so fascinating. So I'll tell you, I can give you a long answer. My runners up are Titan, the moon of Saturn, because it's so cool and it's so interesting, and I really want to know more about it. I also am fascinated by Europa and Io. I mean, they're the two of the coolest worlds in the solar system, I believe, and they're moons of Jupiter, for those who don't know. And but I would say that ultimately the I would really like to have a mission go to Uranus and Neptune, or out either or, because those are worlds that we know so little about and we really haven't explored them. And I am confident that if we go and we really send like a dedicated mission to study them, we will discover amazing things and we will find that they are fascinating worlds. Like we saw this with Pluto, where nobody really knew very much about Pluto and it didn't really seem that interesting. And then when New Horizons like flew by and studied it, we've discovered that it's this gorgeous, dynamic, and fascinating world. And I think we would get the same kind of results from Uranus or Neptune. And it seems a pity that we have these two worlds in our solar system that we don't really know much about. So that's that's what I would pick. Although the runners up are strong contenders as well.
No, I think I've been getting a lot of recommendations for icy moons on this podcast and
Mm-hmm.
Io, which for me is my top one because it's the
Mm,
most volcanically active body in our solar system. Why
yeah.
is it so active? what's
Yeah.
really going on the surface. I know it's different to Earth, so I want something to at least stay orbiting that moon to find out
Yeah.
why. But I completely agree with Uranus and Neptune. I think we need almost like their version of a Cassini mission
Yeah,
to
that would be
go
awesome.
go there, spend about 10 years just observing them and their moons,
Yeah.
find out what's really going on. Because I imagine we'll
Yeah.
find some incredible like storms in the atmospheres like we see on Jupiter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure they're gorgeous for one, and I'm sure they're fascinating, and their moons as well. Like I know Neptune's moon Triton is really interesting to me. It's a beautiful world. They think it's probably a dwarf planet that was captured by Neptune's gravity. Like that's just such a fascinating scientific prospect to study that more. So yeah, that I guess that puts Neptune at the top of my list. Just beat out Uranus a little bit just by having Triton.
Well, just a smidge forward.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. And for the second question, we've already talked about spin-off technology earlier in this episode, but I wanted to ask you if you had a favorite spin-off technology.
Yeah, I thought about this and like it's I I'm again because I'm not super familiar with, the variety of spin-off technologies that we have. It's my answer isn't very well informed, but I do know that telemedicine, like remote medicine, is one spin-off from space technology that is super impactful, particularly in Canada where we have so many our population in the north is spread out so much over huge areas, and so we have a lot of remote populations. So the idea that the kind of technologies that we're developing in robotics for space, those could be applied to providing medical services or like surgeries to people in remote communities with that where they don't have surgeons or doctors. I think that's like I don't know a whole ton about it, but I know that that is one area where yeah, space technologies could be like directly impacting people who otherwise are deprived of a lot of the kind of benefits that a lot of technologies have delivered for people on Earth. So I'd say that's kind of my probably my top pick, but then also, I'm a big fan of like weather prediction technologies that come from space. And so, that's pretty useful in my life. So that's a top pick as well.
No, I think both those picks are very, really interesting and very important for people to be aware
Hmm.
of when it comes to space exploration technology.
Hmm.
And for the final question, since this is the Diaries of Space Explorers, I wanted to ask you, who is your favorite space explorer?
Yeah. So I used to say Julie Payette, but I don't feel that way anymore since she has been outed as an abusive person. So that's
I'm not gonna lie, I was shocked when read that on the news and
yeah.
went like, wait, Pyatt as in the astronaut
Yeah.
Pyatt. Oh,
Very, very, very disappointing because I was really a big fan of her, but I am absolutely not supportive of any kind of abuse. So, no to that. Um, I would say honestly, Carl Sagan has got to be my favorite. Like realistically, even before Julie Payette turned out to be an abusive person, like Carl Sagan still was probably my number one. He's just been so influential to me personally and to so many other people, and particularly in bringing sort of the beauty and majesty of space down to earth for ordinary people and making that accessible and really driving a lot of exploration himself. So yeah, I'm a humongous fan of Carl Sagan, and I think I will forever be. And it's too bad that he's no longer alive, but at the same time, it's good that there's no risk that he's going to turn out to be a terrible person. It's everything is in the past for him, so I think he's safe.
I was about to say after you said Pyatt, I thought like, I wonder if she's gonna say Carl Sagan since she was inspired by Carl Sagan in the
Yes,
beginning.
yeah.
I would have been shocked if he wasn't even a contender on
No,
your
he's
list.
yeah, he's a huge contender. I mean, yeah, he's my main man, definitely.
That's good. I think it's the first time I've got first Carl Sagan I've gotten right now, so I'm gonna keep
Mm.
track of how many times Carl Sagan comes up
I would
in the
assume
series.
it'll be a few. Yeah, he's been so hugely influential to so many people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's really been a giant when it comes to space exploration and public
Mhm.
engagement.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah. So, Kate, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. It's been really great talking with you, and always a pleasure when it comes to talking about public engagement.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's been really nice having this conversation, and yeah, have me back anytime.
Will do. Thank you very much. You have been listening to the Diaries of Space Explorers, where we have been speaking with communication specialist from the Planetary Society, Kate Howells. I hope you found her journey finding to the field of space very interesting, and I hope you all keep an eye out for her book, Space is Cool As, this year, and make sure you grab it on the shelves when it's available, or order it online if we're still going to be in lockdown during this pandemic. Make sure you stay safe and get to read a book which is chock full of fascinating and just flat out cool facts about space and everything in it. If you'd like to learn more about Kate's work, you can find her on Twitter at SpaceKatesH. I have been your host, Gavin Tolometti, and if you'd like to learn more about the podcast or come out as a guest, or even recommend someone who you think would be very good to have on, you can email us at thediariesofspace@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Diaries of Space or on Instagram at Diaries of Space Explorers to get updates and get to see and hear interesting, cool facts about spin-off technology and the space explorers that our space explorers look up to in these episodes. Thank you for listening, and see you all next time.